Hey, and welcome back to the channel, everyone. We are down to the final race of the 2025 F1 Fantasy season. This will be my last video of my rookie year in F1 Fantasy content creation. So before we get into it, just want to say a massive shout out to all the likes, comments, subscriptions, interactions. They've all been truly amazing and definitely grateful for the community. So as you've been following my channel, you know that I had a pretty up and down season into the top 250 after Monaco, and then it's just been a steady sort of DNF roller coaster type of season, a 3x chip that really didn't do nothing for me at all. That is okay. We've got one race left, one chip to use, and some decisions to make. So we'll dive into some of that in this video today. We had free practice one earlier today, which normally is a bit of a session that doesn't really give too much. It's kind of run very early in the day in comparison to when qualifying normally is, especially on this last weekend of the season when we have another chance for some rookie drivers to get some reps in these F1 cars. But we had Lando leading the way, followed by Max and Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, which stands out as something interesting to look at there. Kimi Antonelli fourth. The Saubers doing really good in session one with Nico and Gabi Bortoleto both in the top 8. Russell in 6th. Haas are looking pretty good at the moment. Oliver Behrman in 8th, Sainz in 9th, and Colapinto in 10th. Then we have a bunch of rookies, Ryo Hirakawa in the second Haas, Paul Aaron in the Alpine, Pato Award in the McLaren, Lindblad in the Red Bull. And we had Charles Leclerc's brother Arthur in the Ferrari, driving Lewis Hamilton's car in 16th. Ayumu Iwasa, 17th in Racing Bull, Luke Browning in the Williams, 18th, Jack Crawford in the Aston, and the other Aston in 20th there. So a little bit of a mixed bag there. Going into free practice 2, so of course Oscar Piastri had to sit out for free practice 1, giving up his car, which is one of those things that I wonder whether McLaren could have just taken, I wonder what the fine just would have been, Oscar Piastri going into his final race, going for the championship. Wonder what the penalty that the FIA would have given McLaren for not running a rookie in that FP1, but I guess we'll never know. And then in FP2, we have Lando again topping the timesheets, followed by Max. A little bit of difference there, like 3.5 tenths, almost 4 tenths. George Russell a little bit further behind, so improvements for him. Ollie Behrman in the Haas looking pretty good. So, and Ollie Behrman in his post-interview, on radio as well, really, really enjoying the car. So Haas have just hooked it up from minute 1 at Abu Dhabi. So exciting for them this year, this race. And again, Saubers, Nico and Gabi Bortoleto are both up there in the top 6. So, there is a tight battle between Haas and Sauber for that. I think they're battling for 7th place, I think it is, or 6th place. Probably 7th. So, there's definitely something to pay for between the Haas and the Kick Saubers. So, definitely looking like strong picks potentially for this week. Isaac Hadjar back in sort of his regular sort of top 8 position in the Racing Bulls. Leclerc falling behind in the Ferrari. Alonso showing his veteran ways into the top 10, and Antonelli struggling off the pace a little bit, down in 10th. Oscar Piastri, just not on it on the get-go, down in 11th. So a little bit worrying there. Lance Stroll in 12th, kind of Lance Stroll doing what he normally does, shows his good performances in practices, doesn't quite show up for qualifying. Sainz, both Williams, kind of sitting down there. Carlos Sainz was been on great form this year, so interested to see him kind of down in that lagging area. Lewis Hamilton sandwich in there. Ocon in the Haas, so a bit surprising the difference between Behrman and Ocon, the difference there, knowing that there's pace in the car, but Behrman generally has been outperforming Ocon all year round, especially in qualifying. I suppose not really been a strong qualifier this year. Yuki Tsunoda and the Red Bull down sort of in his regular position, so maybe bowing out of F1 with a bit of a whimper this weekend. Yuki Tsunoda, Liam Lawson, and then both the Alp. Considering those free practice results, you'll see that I've up on the screen, above my head on this screen, is my sort of driver rankings that I have for this weekend. So, it is a weekend where there really is probably not much to choose from between Norris and Verstappen. I know Norris has been topping the timesheet so far, but as we've seen all year with Verstappen and Red Bull, they tend to typically get things figured out on the Saturday for FP3 and for qualifying. And there's not much difference between them. So I think they are I put them in the same tier for Norris and Verstappen. I've got Piastri and Russell as a tier below there. I think Piastri's looking a little bit off from Norris and what the performance of the McLaren is. Definitely looked on it last weekend. Piastri looked like he's back to his regular form, but something about this weekend doesn't really seem like the chips are going to fall in his favor. So I'm just going to go him a little bit lower but down. I've got Russell in there. I think Mercedes are looking quick. Russell just tends to always, again, if he qualifies well, just puts himself in the mix. He could take advantage of any sort of chaos that happens within that first lap. Antonelli, I think, is looking okay. I think I kind of put him a tier under there. And then Leclerc and Hamilton, not really too excited about any Ferrari assets this week. So as my A tiers are on the bottom. In the B tiers, this is where it kind of gets interesting. I think Oliver Behrman in that has just how excited and how excited and how excited he feels after his FP2 that I think looking really strong. His price point definitely sort of puts him in a position where maybe a lot of lower budget teams can afford him, but as a performer, I think he has some good there. Sainz, I know the Williams aren't looking too great so far, but Sainz is just coming in red hot form that I think we have to trust that he's going to be able to pull something out of the bag on Saturdays. Alonso and Hadjar, again, steady eddies for us, but good prices. Generally are good for qualifying in that top 10. And as we know, around Abu Dhabi, low overtake trap, just sort of getting good qualifying position will be key around here. Hulkenberg, I definitely have higher in my rankings this week. The Saubers looking really good. I mean, the Saubers can give us a little bit of false hope occasionally on Fridays. So we'll see if they can kind of continue that form. But at 5 million and having that veteran experience, his 250th Grand Prix, I think there's a lot to like about Hulkenberg this week. Ocon and Bortoleto again in the sister Haas and Sauber cars, basically like ultimately the second driver in those vehicles. So then we know that there's performance in those cars. Maybe I'd probably rank Bortoleto slightly higher than Ocon just on pure raw pace at this moment in time. But I think Ocon's veteran experience probably equals out a little bit. Definitely someone that I'd be considering looking at because I can't really quite afford a Behrman at this moment in time. And I've got Albon, Sunox, Albon, Yuki, and Lawson in the same tier, just mainly because of price. I think they probably do score well, probably have a good chance of scoring double digits just as much as anyone else in these beer tiers. But from a price point, I think they're going to be very low down on our abilities to afford them. And then sort of the bottom tier, Gasly, Stroll, Colapinto, not too excited about Alpines or the second Aston at this time. So my thoughts from here are, I think Lando is looking like a really strong pick this week. I think he's probably going to be, whether it's Lando or whether it's Max, I think you can probably make an argument for both. And I think probably the heart is probably going to tell you which one to pick. But I do think that they both have a great chance for pole. They both have a great chance to stay in the clean air. And if that does happen, I think one of them is going to get the fastest lap. And I think the person who gets the Drivers' Championship is going to take driver of the day. So, probably Lando is maybe slightly edging that right now. But as I said, I think Max, you never can count them out. So that's kind of like where I'd go. I think from a budget perspective and from this, like, how do you pick the best two out of those sort of three drivers right now? I think if you have the budget for it, I think my favorites is obviously the Lando, Max sort of teams that can afford the McLaren, Mercedes, and then your selection of B tiers. I think that one is probably going to be the best. If you have autopilot, if you have the budget for it, I think this is the team that you want to get into. If you can't afford that, I think you can take your pick as to which one you want to downgrade from here, whether you want to choose Max or whether you want to choose Lando. But I think from there, you would go down to Piastri. And then I think this type of build is kind of what frees up the majority of the, for those of us that are sort of not in that higher budget, like top 1% of budgets, let's say, that at this point, you kind of have a lot of flexibility with that second B tier driver. So, and I think most of us are going into this week with 2 transfers. So I think it's really about optimizing these top 2A drivers to which ones is going to be the ones that you can afford the most with your selection of B tiers. For those that can't afford the Piastri, there too, obviously dropping down to Russell could be this like non-McLaren type of build where you just kind of think that maybe Lando has enough, just needs to secure pole. Just as the podium. Maybe you're thinking Oscar's looking off it, that he just may not even be in and around sniffing the points sniffing the top places at this moment in time. If he sort of gets unlucky and drops a few places, is he going to get something, get those places back? And Russell is probably one of those, probably the best driver on the grid that has the chance to sort of take advantage of anything that happens to Piastri. So I don't mind the Verstappen Russell builds, and then it kind of gives you opportunities to sort of upgrade your B tiers and sort of getting into a sort of an Oliver Behrman type of build here too. So from these 5 assets, you have a strong, top 10 qualifying all around. But obviously going ahead into a weekend where McLaren definitely look like they have the edge in qualifying. To not go with any McLaren drivers seems a little bit too on the riskier side. So for someone like me, this actual team might actually look as quite a decent differential, purely because it also allows me to fit Behrman into this type of team, which, as you can see, if for those teams that are sort of thinking about a triple McLaren type of build, my budget's not the highest at this moment in time, but I'm still 1.6 away from Oliver Behrman. So with Oliver Behrman probably being one of the most valuable B tiers, and for those of you that can't afford him, or if you're going with sort of the McLaren build, like with this McLaren build, you're sort of going with a Sainz, which is a super popular pick right now. I think a lot of people are thinking about Hülkenberg, which also helps from that perspective. Maybe even a Gabby Bortoleto too. So, I think there are some teams that maybe not looking at an Oliver Behrman, and I kind of wonder if he can sort of surprise us and get some sort of like top 5, top 6 sort of score. That maybe a team such as taking the bit of the underdog in Max. Sticking with Russell, sort of see if he can sort of play spoiler to this championship weekend, allows me to get into Oliver Behrman, and that would be a 2 transfer move to me. So it kind of like doesn't really give any much synergy to my team. Like there's just sort of the double assets with Russell and Mercedes, McLaren in there. But yeah, if I'm looking to maybe make a strong sort of push, then maybe this kind of team looks like it could be a nice differential, especially from where I am, 4.6k to really jump into anything sort of in that top 2,500. I think it needs to be quite different. But it remains to be seen. Like I kind of like this team from my fantasy perspective, but from a fan experience and watching the game, I do probably have to side a little bit. But I think I'm leaning towards wanting to support Lando in his quest for his first Drivers' Championship. So if I was to sort of go with my 2 transfer moves, taking Russell out, putting in Lando, taking Yuki out, leaves me 7.7 million in the bank. And from here, there's Sainz downwards from here. So I know Sainz is probably a popular pick. Again, I think if I'm in the top 1,000, I'm looking to preserve my rank. I'm probably just fine taking a Sainz here. I don't think there's anything wrong with that type of team. I think if you're just looking for a little bit of differentials, you've obviously got the Salvers in there with Nico and Gabby Bortoleto. For me, I think a lot of people are kind of going the Gabby Bortoleto routes, the Hülkenberg route. So if I just decide to stick with my sort of triple McLaren route here, I think I probably would just jump down to Bortoleto. I think less people will jump into Bortoleto than Hülkenberg. And so I probably would rank, it's interesting because I think these Hazes are, the Hazes and the Saubers are probably the biggest, one of the best B tier fights to look for this week. And I'd probably say of those 4 cars, you probably have Behrman at the top. Maybe you'd have Hülkenberg second, and then kind of have how I have my rankings with Ocon and Bortoleto. So with Ocon being a little bit higher, I can't quite get into him. I think I could actually get into him if I stuck with Russell. Actually, yeah, I can. So that actually kind of leaves me with 1.2 million in the back. So again, a team, a team that I'm looking at banking on, like Piastri not really doing well and Russell taking advantage and getting that extra boost with Ocon a differential. So that's something that I could look at. But yeah, also I did let you know that I did have my final fix left. So kind of taking this type of team with say Bortoleto, it does give me that. I know that Max is cheaper than Lando, but if something was to happen in qualifying, then I can always use my final fix to go down to Max at this level. So that is some of my thoughts around there. I think everyone has a few options this week, whether it be from, I think you kind of got like 2 transfers to work with. So I think it's maybe like swapping probably one of your A tiers and one of your B tiers around. If you're already even going in with a Verstappen Piastri build, I think this is actually a good build too. The difference between Max and Lando could be like, again, Lando could just be fine with getting third or second. Like maybe he takes pole, maybe he takes it, a little bit like cautious on that first corner. Max has to be a little bit more aggressive. So if he doesn't grab pole, does he get second? Does he sort of try something over aggressive at the first corner? Does he drop a few places back? I think Max's high speed is looking is significantly higher than the McLarens at this time. So they are kind of maybe playing the component of like if the worst case scenario happens and Max sort of drops down a few places, that with his max speed that he has on those straights, maybe he's going to be able to get some positions back as well. So, on a low overtake track, if someone like Lando gets pole, he's just going to sort of run away with it, and he's probably going to get that fastest lap and that 10 extra points. But maybe Max has a little bit, maybe there's another side of him where he can, maybe there's some, he could also be someone that just grabs pole and takes the race win, the fastest lap as well. But I kind of think that if Lando drops down a few places, I mean, he has to get them back, obviously, to secure his chance of winning the title. But, doesn't need to do as much as what, say, a Max would do. So, I'm still kind of toying around with a few options here. Like my Max and Piastri build, like if I was to do something like this, my 2Fs would be on Max. Probably going with someone like a Bortoletto over maybe more other options, such as a sort of an Ocon. But I do think it's kind of like, I might even start with a team like this with Max and Oscar, and then if Lando grabs pole, I might even just final fix into Lando, and then I'll be supporting his charge for his first title. So anyway, that is some of my final thoughts. I still want to look at free practices 3, and I'll be on sort of X, sort of posting some team thoughts and sort of where I'm leaning tomorrow. So follow me on there. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Once again, thanks very much for watching along, and we will catch you on the next one.